A new study out by the Government Accountability Office found that millions of families with a worker earning the federal minimum wage are still living in poverty. Now, this isn't surprising, but it's a very interesting study, which points out why we need to up the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour at least. Now, this study was commissioned by Senator Bernie Sanders and argues that the findings amount to overwhelming evidence that $7.25 is not enough to keep working families out of poverty, and that Congress must raise the minimum wage to a living wage. So let me break down exactly what this government report found. Now, the GAO report discovered that about 20% of families, and I'm going to put up the image here, they found that 20% of families with a worker earning up to the federal minimum wage, they also found that 13% of families with a worker earning above the federal minimum wage to $12 per hour, and 5% of families with a worker earning $12.01 to $16 per hour were also in poverty between the years of 1995 and 2016. So you can see that graph out there. So, okay. So you have to understand, right? Those are the numbers. So the people that, even the people that are making $15 an hour are still in poverty. That's a disaster. But when you talk to certain people, mostly conservatives, but I think there are some liberals, centrists out there, or even people who are more sympathetic to some liberal views, things that people working in, for example, in fast food, don't deserve $15 an hour. We shouldn't raise the wage to $15 an hour, maybe $10 an hour, maybe $12 an hour, but 15, that's asking for way too much. I mean, geez. Now, some of the things that you might hear is, oh, they're college kids, they don't deserve, or they're high school kids looking for an extra buck, oh, they don't really work all that hard, or my favorite, well, they mess up my order. That's ridiculous. So wait, because somebody makes a mistake and messes up your burger, they don't deserve a living wage. That's horrible. You know, you can actually return that burger if they mess up, and they'll make you a new one, and usually they'll throw in something extra for making you wait. Just saying. Now, what does any of that have to do with people not deserving a wage they can actually survive on without having to rely on the government for benefits? I mean, do we do that in other industries? I mean, not necessarily. But apparently we do in food services. That's apparently the opinion of a lot of people. Hey, they messed up, they make a mistake, and so they should get less. They don't deserve to get paid more because every time they mess up. Ridiculous. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, I have noticed that people in Wall Street who mess up and crash their business and end up crashing the economy sometimes get a golden parachute worth millions and millions of dollars. Kind of weird how that works out. It's like the opposite. You screw up on Wall Street and cost people millions of dollars, lose their their retirement. You can still get away with a golden parachute as long as you made the shareholders some money. But anyway, now the other thing to consider here for the minimum wage is, look, $15 an hour, a living wage, it is the bare minimum of what you can actually live on. It's not all that much. It actually comes out to about $30,000 a year. The median wage in America is $50,000 a year, and that is just barely considered to be lower middle class. From $50,000 to $100,000 a year is actually the middle class, and it goes up from there, right? $30,000 is barely hitting the lower middle class. That's actually literally the threshold. That is unless you live in a huge metropolitan area like New York or LA. In that case, $30K a year is literal poverty. Now, the other argument, of course, and I mentioned it before, is that they're all high school kids with summer jobs. Why should they get $15 an hour? Why should they make more than a paramedic does? Well, again, that's actually wrong. The average age of a fast food worker is about 29 years old. According to the National Employment Law Project, 40% of fast food workers are 25 or older, 31% have at least attempted college, and more than 26% are currently parents raising children. Those are 2013 numbers. And more than a third, almost nearly a half of them, also have a second job to go along with it so they can actually take care of their families. That is why we need a higher wage floor. Now, thankfully, Bernie Sanders actually introduced legislation that would move us in that direction, even though we go very slowly at it. Now, this is the Raise the Wage Act of 2017, which now boasts 30 Senate co-sponsors. Now, what it would do is it would raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024 and index it to inflation thereafter. Now, 2024, that's a lot of time. So actually, that's a very pragmatic plan. Well, wait, I thought Bernie Sanders was supposed to be some wild, crazy socialist with pie in the sky ideas. This is actually very centrist idea. Oh, let's move real nice and slow up to $15 an hour by 2024 and then index it to inflation. Not exactly the wild-eyed socialism that the corporate media and the Democratic Party seem to cast on him, but nonetheless, I think it's pretty decent legislation. And it gives companies plenty of time to get ready to absorb that new cost. Now, the GAO also notes that while the federal minimum wage has increased multiple times since the 1980s, it has not risen nearly enough to keep pace with inflation or the income boosts enjoyed by those in the top 1%. So consider this, right? There's been a lot of growth in the incomes of the 1%. Over the past 30 years, a lot of the income gains, most of the income gains, most of the wealth has gone to the very, 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 very rich, while incomes have stagnated. So when adjusted for inflation, the minimum wage, thanks to that, has actually trended downward over the past several decades, according to the study. So you're probably shocked, maybe, or you'd be shocked to find out that the minimum wage adjusted for inflation back in the 1960s was actually higher than the minimum wage of today. In 1968, for example, the purchasing power of the minimum wage was equal to about $10.74 an hour. That was at its peak. That's the highest it's ever gone. Now the minimum wage is worth less than I think it ever has been. Not only that, but welfare benefits are also worth less than they have been traditionally. The GAO report has found that social safety net programs are often not sufficient to lift working people out of poverty, and in some cases, even workers earning the minimum wage while at the poverty level still earn too much to qualify for federal assistance. That is essentially leaving people in a gigantic poverty trap that they cannot get out of. They can't get welfare benefits if they're working a certain amount of hours and getting a certain amount of money because it's so low. But they also can't escape poverty. Even working that job, even possibly working 2 or 3 jobs, because wages are so depressed. Now, I shouldn't have to ask you if people working full time should, actually make enough money to live without having to get government benefits. Now, the obvious answer should be no. People should be able to live off what they earn without having to have government benefits. Why should we continue to subsidize these giant corporations who refuse to pay a living wage with our tax money in the form of welfare? I mean, that's what it is. It's not a progressive position. It's not a conservative position. It's not a libertarian position. No, what this is that it's a corporatist position. It's this neoliberal corporatism that puts taxpayer money into the companies that actually don't need it. It puts taxpayer money as a subsidy for them not having to raise their wages for workers. And this ideology is unfortunately infected both parties, who essentially work for these giant corporations. Now, the Democrats, yes, they'll give more welfare, and that actually does help people. But at the same time, that welfare essentially offsets the cost to corporations who decide, you know what, I'm going to use this welfare, I'm going to put it in my pocket and just not raise wages. Think about Walmart, for example. Walmart basically will tell people, okay, their employees, sign up for food stamps, sign up for Medicaid. you get these government benefits so I don't actually have to, one, pay you a living wage, and two, offer medical insurance that you can afford. So essentially, Walmart, the Walton family, is getting an enormous subsidy in the form of these programs. Not only that, but the Democrats also favor deregulating some of these corporations. Now, Republicans, on the other hand, are even worse. They decide, no, we're going to give more tax cuts for the rich. We're going to deregulate even more than the Democrats. And we're going to give everything to the wealthiest in Americans and the wealthiest multinational corporations. We have got to change. Raising the minimum wage actually will help in this situation. Because then you're saying to the companies, we're not going to subsidize you anymore. In fact, we're actually going to make you pay your workers what they're supposed to actually make. Now, it won't solve the problems that I've outlined, but it will actually help some of the workers and might actually save money on welfare programs, on government programs. But I think the real solution here is to get the money out of politics so then we can actually go and fix all the underlying issues that create these other issues. And if we could do that, we could actually have a more functional government that responds to the people and not just to the will of the giant multinational corporations. So raising the living wage, or raising the minimum wage to a living wage, will definitely do a lot more good than it will harm. It's been shown in other separate studies that it does not reduce employment, and it actually doesn't raise prices significantly for customers. So we have to do this now. We can no longer wait. We need a living wage now. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.